Close on a leather dog collar. Brass tag catching September light. Birmingham, 1963. Smoke still rises from the 16th Street Baptist Church. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. kneels in the rubble behind the building. A small whimpering sound comes from under the debris. He moves concrete chunks with bare hands. Beneath the wreckage, a terrified brown puppy, maybe 8 weeks old. The collar is too big, sliding off the tiny neck. The tag reads only P. The rest is scratched away. King carries the puppy out inside his jacket. Photographers miss this moment. They're focused on the tragedy. The dog shivers against King's chest during the eulogy. That night, the dog refuses to leave King's hotel room. For the next 5 years, the dog walks every march. FBI files later note, subject accompanied by unidentified canine, 1963-1968. What did that dog witness that history forgot? September 15, 1963. The bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church killed 4 young girls. Denise McNair, 11 years old. Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, and Addie Mae Collins, all 14. King arrived in Birmingham within hours. The city was a war zone. Segregationists had bombed the church during Sunday school. King walked through the aftermath, speaking to families, trying to hold the movement together. Behind the church, away from cameras, he heard the whimpering. The puppy was trapped under concrete and wood. The collar suggested someone had cared for this dog once, but the tag was too damaged to read. King pulled the puppy free. The animal was shaking. Covered in dust, he wrapped the dog in his suit jacket. No one questioned it. There were bigger tragedies to document. That night, in the A.G. Gaston Motel, King sat with the puppy on his lap. The dog wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just pressed against King's chest and trembled. By morning, the dog had calmed. King's associates arrived for strategy meetings. The dog sat in the corner, watching. Someone asked if King wanted to find the owner. King looked at the collar, at the illegible tag, and said, "I don't think he has one anymore." The dog stayed. In the weeks after Birmingham, King traveled constantly. Atlanta, Washington, New York. The dog went everywhere. King's wife, Coretta, was surprised when he brought the animal home. Their children, Yolanda, Martin III, Dexter, and baby Bernice, were delighted. But the dog wasn't interested in playing. He followed King from room to room, sat beside him during phone calls, slept at the foot of his bed. Friends asked about the dog. King didn't have a good answer. "He needed someone," King said once. "Or maybe I did." The Southern Christian Leadership Conference held meetings in the King family basement. The dog attended everyone. He sat quietly in the corner, never barking, never causing disruption. Ralph Abernathy joked that the dog was a better listener than half the committee. Andrew Young tried to pet the dog once. The animal allowed it, but didn't respond. The dog's focus was singular. He watched King constantly. In October, King traveled to Washington for meetings with the Kennedy administration. The dog came along. Security at the White House was confused. No animals allowed. King left the dog with an assistant outside. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When King emerged, the dog was sitting exactly where he'd been left, eyes locked on the door. The assistant said the dog hadn't moved once. By early 1964, the dog had become a fixture. Civil rights photographers began noticing the animal in the background of their shots. At first, they cropped him out. Then they started asking questions. Who owned the dog? Why was he always there? King's team had no official answer. The dog simply existed in King's orbit. In April 1964, King wrote his letter from Birmingham jail response. The essay became one of his most famous works. What few people knew, the dog was present during much of the writing. King had been arrested in Birmingham the previous year, but in the months after, he refined the letter into its published form. The dog sat beside him during late-night editing sessions, King's hand occasionally dropping to scratch behind the animal's ears. The collar remained worn and illegible. Associates suggested replacing it. King refused. "It's part of his story," he said. In June, civil rights workers James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner disappeared in Mississippi. Their bodies were found in August. The violence was escalating. King spoke at memorial services, his voice steady but exhausted. The dog was always nearby. Observers noted the animal's calm presence during moments of chaos. At strategy meetings about voter registration in the upcoming Freedom Summer campaign, the dog sat silently. Some found it comforting. Others found it strange. But no one suggested the dog leave. December 1964. Oslo, Norway. King received the Nobel Peace Prize at 35, the youngest recipient ever. The prize committee cited his nonviolent resistance to racial prejudice. King donated the entire $54,000 prize to the civil rights movement. What the press didn't cover, the dog traveled to Oslo. The Norwegian hotel staff were baffled. No pets allowed. King's team negotiated an exception. The dog stayed in King's suite, quiet and unobtrusive. On the night of the ceremony, the dog waited backstage. Security didn't know what to do with him. King simply said, "He stays close." After the ceremony, King hand-fed the dog pieces of his dinner. An associate asked again about the dog's name. King paused. "I never gave him one," he admitted. "It didn't seem right. He's his own." This confused people. How do you live with a dog for over a year without naming him? But King was firm. The dog needed no name. He simply was. By early 1965, the FBI had taken notice. Agents monitoring King observed the dog in their surveillance reports. J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO operation tracked King obsessively. The dog appeared in 47 separate surveillance logs between 1963 and 1968. Agents tried to trace the animal's origin. No veterinary records, no purchase history. No previous owner came forward. The dog had no documented past before Birmingham. To the FBI, this was suspicious. To King, it was simply the truth. March 1965. Selma, Alabama. The Selma to Montgomery marches began after Bloody Sunday, state troopers attacking peaceful protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. King led the third march, which finally reached Montgomery after 5 days and 54 miles. The dog walked the entire distance. Photographers captured the march from every angle. In several iconic images, if you look closely at the background, you can see a small brown dog among the marchers. The dog didn't struggle, didn't lag, just walked steadily beside King mile after mile. At night, when marchers camped along Route 80, the dog stayed close to King's tent. Volunteers offered the dog water and food. The animal accepted both, but always returned to King's side. During the final rally at the Alabama state capitol, 25,000 people gathered. King delivered his "How long, not long" speech. The dog sat backstage, calm amid the noise. By this point, the press had started asking direct questions. Who was the dog? Where did he come from? King's responses were vague. "He's been with me since Birmingham," King said. "That's all I know." Some reporters tried to investigate. They found nothing. The dog had no history, no paper trail, no origin story beyond that day in the rubble. One journalist wrote a feature story about Dr. King's mystery dog. The piece ran in a small southern paper. Most people ignored it, but the FBI clipped the article and added it to their files. 1966. Chicago. King moved the civil rights movement north, focusing on housing discrimination and economic inequality. The Chicago Freedom Movement faced fierce resistance. White residents rioted when black families tried to move into all-white neighborhoods. King marched through hostile crowds. Bricks were thrown. Insults shouted. The dog walked beside him through all of it. During one march through Marquette Park, a rock struck King in the head. He stumbled but kept walking. The dog pressed against his leg, steadying him. Observers later said the animal seemed to sense danger before it arrived. At night, King stayed in a cramped apartment in the North Lawndale neighborhood, experiencing the conditions his movement sought to change. The dog slept at the foot of his bed. King's children visited when they could. They'd grown attached to the dog. 9-year-old Yolanda asked her father if the dog had a name yet. King smiled. "Not yet," he said. His son, Martin III, 8 years old, tried teaching the dog tricks. The dog ignored the commands. He only responded to King. Dexter, 5, simply sat with the dog and talked to him. The dog listened. In September, King met with Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley, negotiating agreements on fair housing. The meeting was tense. Daley was a machine politician, skeptical of King's methods, but an agreement was reached. After the meeting, King walked back to his apartment. The dog trotted ahead, then stopped suddenly. King paused. A car sped past, too fast, too close. The dog had sensed something. King never forgot that moment. Late 1966. An FBI lab technician examined photographs of the dog from surveillance files. Something bothered him about the collar. In one clear image from Selma, the collar's leather showed unusual wear patterns. The technician requested the analysis be sent to a specialist. In early 1967, an independent lab performed carbon dating on a similar collar that had been recovered during an unrelated investigation. The results were impossible. The leather dated to the 1920s, but the dog was clearly young, maybe 3 years old by 1966. How could a 3-year-old dog wear a 40-year-old collar? The FBI investigated further. They searched archives of early civil rights workers. In a box of belongings from a 1920s NAACP organizer named Thomas Hope, they found a photograph. In the image, a man standing beside a small brown dog. The dog wore a collar with a brass tag. The tag was too blurred to read in the photograph. Thomas Hope had disappeared in 1925 after investigating a lynching in Mississippi. His body was never found. Neither was his dog. The FBI cross-referenced the collar in the photograph with the collar worn by King's dog. The leather pattern matched. But this was insane. Dogs don't live 40 years. The collar must have been passed down, or reused, or the connection was coincidental. The FBI agent writing the report noted, "Coincidence seems unlikely. Recommend further investigation." But Hoover had no interest in ghost stories. He wanted actionable intelligence on King. The report was filed away. No follow-up was conducted. But some agents couldn't shake the feeling that something about the dog was deeply wrong. Spring 1967, King spoke out against the Vietnam War in his Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church in New York. The condemnation cost him political allies. President Lyndon Johnson turned against him. Donors withdrew support. Even some civil rights leaders criticized the move. King was increasingly isolated. The dog remained. Andrew Young pulled King aside one evening after a difficult meeting. People are asking about the dog again, Young said carefully. They want to know his story. King looked at the animal, sitting quietly in the corner. I don't have a story to give them, King said. Young pressed, but the collar, where did it come from? King touched the worn leather. I found him in Birmingham. The tag was already ruined. I don't know what it said. I don't know who he belonged to. Young hesitated. Some people think it's strange, that you won't name him, that you won't explain him. King's voice was firm. Some things don't need explaining. But privately, King had questions too. He'd noticed how the dog never seemed to age. In 4 years, the animal hadn't changed. Still the same size, same energy, same watchful eyes. King mentioned this once to Coretta. She suggested it was stress, he was imagining things. But King knew what he saw. The dog was exactly as he'd been in 1963. In December 1967, King began planning the Poor People's Campaign. The goal was to unite people across racial lines around economic justice. It would be his most ambitious project. The dog attended every planning meeting. Ralph Abernathy joked, that dog's heard more strategy sessions than half of Congress. King smiled. But late at night he wondered, what was the dog really hearing? Early 1968. Threats against King intensified. The FBI's surveillance was constant. Local police in Memphis, Chicago, and Atlanta tracked his movements. White supremacist groups openly discussed assassination. King's security team was on edge. The dog made King predictable. The animal was always with him, always visible, a clear marker in any crowd. Andrew Young raised the concern directly. The dog makes you easier to track. King refused to send the dog away. He stayed with me this long, King said. I'm not abandoning him now. But the fear was real. King's speeches took on a darker tone. He talked about not living to see the promised land. His exhaustion was visible. He lost weight, slept poorly. The dog stayed closer than ever. In March 1968, King traveled to Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. The strike began after 2 black workers, Ecole Cole and Robert Walker, were crushed to death in a garbage compactor. The city refused to recognize the workers' union. King saw this as a crucial fight, connecting civil rights to economic justice. He arrived in Memphis on March 28th. The dog came with him. The first march turned violent. Windows were broken. Police responded with tear gas and clubs. King was rushed away, devastated that nonviolence had failed. He returned to Memphis in early April, determined to lead a peaceful march. The dog stayed at his side through it all. On April 3rd, King delivered his final speech. I've been to the mountaintop. His voice was hoarse, his message prophetic. I may not get there with you. The dog sat backstage, eyes locked on King. That night, at the Lorraine Motel, the dog wouldn't leave King's side. April 4th, 1968. Morning at the Lorraine Motel, room 306. King woke to the dog pressed against the door. The animal was agitated, pacing, whining softly. This was unusual. The dog was always calm. King tried to settle him. The dog wouldn't relax. Meetings filled the day. King spoke with organizers about the upcoming march. The dog sat in the corner, tense. Observers noticed. Something's wrong with the dog, someone said. King dismissed it. He's fine. But the dog wasn't fine. As evening approached, King prepared to leave for dinner. The dog followed him onto the balcony. Room 306 overlooked the motel parking lot. King stood at the railing, talking with colleagues below. Ralph Abernathy was inside, putting on aftershave. Jesse Jackson was in the parking lot. The dog sat at King's feet, completely still now. At 6:01 p.m., a single shot rang out. King fell backward. The dog bolted, not toward King but toward the street. Witnesses said the dog moved like lightning. By the time people rushed to King's side, the dog was gone. Police arrived within minutes. They found King's blood on the balcony. They found his belongings in the room. They found the worn leather collar near the railing. The brass tag was still illegible, but it was warm to the touch. The dog was never seen again. No one could explain where he went. Security had surrounded the motel within seconds, but the dog had vanished. In the chaos and grief, most people forgot about the animal, but those who'd known King remembered. The dog had walked with him for 5 years and disappeared the moment King died. In the days after the assassination, King's close associates tried to make sense of what happened. The dog was barely mentioned in official reports, but among King's inner circle, questions lingered. Where had the dog gone? Why had he disappeared so completely? Andrew Young later wrote about the dog in his private journals. He noted the animal's strange behavior on April 4th, the agitation, the sudden calm, the impossible disappearance. Ralph Abernathy spoke about the dog in a small interview decades later. That dog knew, Abernathy said. He knew something we didn't. Coretta Scott King kept the collar among her husband's personal effects. She never spoke publicly about the dog, but friends said she would sometimes hold the collar, running her fingers over the illegible tag. The King children asked about the dog after their father's death. Where had he gone? Would he come back? Coretta had no answers. The FBI closed their file on the dog after April 1968. The animal was noted as missing, presumed stray or deceased. No further investigation was conducted, but the surveillance photos remained. 47 documented appearances. 5 years of presence at the most dangerous moments of the civil rights movement. Historians who later studied King's life occasionally noticed the dog in archival photographs. A small brown figure in the background of Selma. A blur beside King in Chicago. A silhouette at the Nobel Prize ceremony. Most dismissed it as a stray that followed King for a while, but those who looked closer saw the same collar in every image, the same watchful eyes, the same impossible consistency. In 2010, a researcher examining the Thomas Hope archives found the 1920s photograph again. The dog in that image bore an uncanny resemblance to King's dog, but that would mean the impossible. The collar sits now in the King Center archives in Atlanta. It's preserved at a clear case, labeled simply, Collar, Origin Unknown, circa 1963-1968. The brass tag has never been fully restored. Conservators attempted to clean it in the 1990s. They managed to reveal 2 letters, H and P. The rest remains scratched away. Some believe it said Hope, possibly linking back to Thomas Hope, the 1920s organizer. But this is speculation. No one knows for certain. The collar is rarely displayed. It's not part of the main King exhibition. Most visitors never see it. But researchers who request access are always struck by the same thing. The leather is impossibly well preserved for something that old. It should have deteriorated by now. It hasn't. The tag still catches light the way it did in 1963. Stories about the dog circulate in civil rights history circles. Some dismiss the whole thing as a footnote. Others see it as something more. A few older activists who marched with King remember the dog clearly. They described the same thing. A calm, watchful presence that never seemed afraid, even when everyone else was terrified. One marcher said, "That dog saw more history than most people ever will." In Memphis, on the anniversary of King's death, People sometimes report seeing a small brown dog near the Lorraine Motel, now the National Civil Rights Museum. Security guards say it's impossible. No dogs are allowed on the grounds. But the sightings persist. A brown dog sitting quietly near room 306. There one moment, gone the next. Whether these stories are grief, memory, or something else entirely, no one can say. The truth is simpler and stranger than any explanation. A homeless puppy was found in the rubble of a church bombing in 1963. He wore a collar too big for him, with a tag too damaged to read. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. carried him out. The dog stayed for 5 years. He walked through Selma, Chicago, Memphis. He sat through speeches and strategy meetings. He was there when King received the Nobel Prize. He was there when rocks were thrown and bullets were threatened. He was there on the balcony when everything ended. And then he was gone. No one knows where the collar came from. No one knows why the dog never aged. No one knows how he vanished so completely on April 4th, 1968. The only certainty is the collar itself, worn leather, illegible tag, sitting in an archive in Atlanta, catching light, holding questions no one can answer. Some things don't need explaining. King once said, maybe he was right, or maybe the dog was something the movement needed, a witness who asked for nothing, who judged no one, who simply walked alongside a man trying to change the world. 5 years, 47 documented protests, thousands of miles, one impossible disappearance. The collar stays in the archive. The legend stays in the margins of history. And somewhere, maybe, a small brown dog sits quietly, watching, waiting, still wearing a collar that says P, still carrying whatever that means. The story doesn't end because we don't have the answers. It ends because sometimes the mystery is the point.